I hold in my hand what the historian George Knight calls undoubtedly the single most divisive book in Seventh-day Adventist history. It's a book, he says, that has caused prolonged alienation and separation, the formation of factions. It is, he says, the symbol of Adventist theological tension. The year was 1957. The first half of the 20th century marked by an unfavorable view of Seventh-day Adventists by Christians and evangelicals. Many, if not most, believed that Adventists were in fact a cult, were not legitimately a part of the rest of the Christian community. It was in this moment that this book entered the scene. Very briefly, this is how the 1950s story went. Certain evangelical and Christian leaders with names like Barnhouse launched an inquiry into Seventh-day Adventism to determine, is this movement in fact a cult or is it Christian? Among their inquiry, they talked with certain theological and other leadership types in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, with names like Froom and Reed and Anderson to make this determination. Interesting, in their conversation, the subject of Christology was central. Who is Jesus? What is the cross, the atonement, and grace? A result of these conversations, two controversial publications. First, a series of articles in Eternity magazine, an evangelical journal, arguing that Adventists are in fact not a cult, but part of the Christian community. But not everyone in the broader Christian world agreed with this sentiment, and Eternity magazine lost a third of its readership overnight. A second publication, Seventh-day Adventists Answer Questions on Doctrine. A publication of the Review and Herald, the intended audience, the broader Christian world, Adventist Theology and Doctrine, written with the hope that we would legitimate ourselves as a Christian movement. Who wrote this book? I read to you from the title page. Prepared by a representative group of Seventh-day Adventist leaders, Bible teachers, and editors. No name, a representative group. But not everyone within the Adventist church liked what this so-called representative group had to say. Historians tell us that part of the difficulty, the struggle, was personal. Some people felt left out, that they were not a part of this conversation and this production. We also learned from history, though, that many Adventists did not like the content of this book, believing that Adventist theology and doctrine had been watered down in order to make it more palatable for the general Christian community. But beneath the interpersonal tensions and the theological disputes lurked a much deeper issue, a fissure of great significance that existed long before 1957. You see, the book Questions on Doctrine did not so much stir up trouble in the 1950s as it pulled back a curtain on a problem in the Adventist church that certainly went back as early as the 1880s and really to the first days of this movement's history. A conflict, a war, a friction, turmoil. To quote Knight once more, a crisis of identity. What does it mean to be a Seventh-day Adventist? Who are we? What does it mean that we've come out of the world? Should we relate to it and be a part of it, or are we thoroughly separated? Are we a part of the Christian community, or are we different? What does it mean to be peculiar, to be unique, to be remnant? What does it mean to be us? We've wrestled with this question throughout our history. Who are we? An identity crisis. This is the big issue. And so in this big tension, there are those who say, wait, we're Christian first, we are definitely part of the rest. Adventism is secondary, and they would look at a book like Questions on Doctrine and say, a noble effort. But there are others that would say, wait a minute, what about our uniqueness? What about the special reasons we were called? What about our peculiarity? And some on the extreme of that viewpoint would say, Catholics, Baptists, Methodists, atheists, they're all in the same camp. We're the one true church. But a struggle over identity, a crisis of who we are. An intramural war that has gone on in our denomination since its inception. And all wars have costs. People get hurt in wars. How many arguments, as we look back in our history and even some of the current struggles, are rooted in this question: who are we? What does it mean to be a Seventh-day Adventist? I wonder how much intellectual and theological and emotional and financial and organizational horsepower and energy has been spent dealing with this question. I wonder, has it caused us to be a less healthy people than we might have been? Has it damaged the capacity to have a vibrant mission in the view of God than we might have had? Is it possible that we are a good denomination, but not a great one, because we struggle with this question of identity? Who are we? Is there a new direction? Is it possible that we could have an alternative future? I believe the answer is yes. But it requires setting aside the old historic question, who are we? And asking a brand new question. This past year, I learned a new term. It's musical, Latin, cantus firmus. It literally means a fixed melody, an enduring melody line. Composers historically would give this line to the tenor. And we get the word tenor from the Latin tenere, which means to hold. This is the line, the melody that holds all things together. And the rule was this: composers said, and you think of organ music, that you could have all kinds of music over here, and you could have notes over there and notes over here, all over the place, but here's the rule. It has to be in harmony with the cantus firmus. It must agree with the tenor line that holds all things together. Now, interestingly enough, this music over here doesn't even have to agree with this music over here, but it all must agree and harmonize with the cantus firmus. Jesus is God's cantus firmus. Jesus is God's enduring melody line. Jesus is God's tenor, the one who holds it all together. Colossians says all things are held together in him. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian and Christian martyr, in the final days of his life in a Nazi camp, wrote a personal letter to a friend, and he worked with this metaphor. Bonhoeffer said, hold to the cantus firmus. Pin your faith to the cantus firmus. Where the cantus firmus is plain, and clear. You can explore the counterpoint. You can explore the world to its limits. Where Jesus is plain, where Jesus is clear, you can explore the world to its limits. We can say, is that piece of preaching, is that music, does it harmonize with Jesus or not? What about that group? What about that relationship? What about that initiative? What about that statement? What about that policy position? Does it agree with Jesus or is it in disharmony? If it agrees with Jesus, if it's in line with the cantus firmus, then it's in, and if it's in disharmony, it is out. Now notice, we have now shifted the question. We are no longer asking, who are we, but who is he? We are no longer consumed with our own identity, listening to the rest of the Christian world to see how we ought to fit in, nor listening to our own uniqueness to make sure we're sticking with that. Instead, we've developed a new ear. We are now listening for Jesus. We are listening to his miracles. We are listening to his teachings. We are listening to his conversations. We are listening to his prayers. We are listening to his tears and his suffering and his death and his resurrection. The question has shifted, and now you can see it begins to open up some incredible possibilities. Let me try this one on you. How about this? I now hold in my hand what is not the most controversial book in Seventh-day Adventist history. But I would argue that it is one of the most theologically significant. It is in the pews of churches around the world, and I have to tell you, soon after preachers are quiet, people forget what they say. But you put theology to music. You put doctrine to music, and it seeps within the soul, and it stays. This is a powerful book. Now, I want to read to you a little bit about the contributors to the Seventh-day Adventist hymnal. Just a few. Hymn 555, Clement of Alexandria, a Christian theologian around 200 A.D. Hymn 2, St. Francis of Assisi, the Italian friar and preacher. Hymn 17, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. Hymn 18, J.S. Bach, a Lutheran who led music at St. Thomas Church in Leipzig. 480, John Greenleaf Whittier, a Quaker poet. 148, Thomas à Kempis, a late medieval monk. 228, the Venerable Bede, a Benedictine monk. 424, Bernard of Cluny, also a Benedictine monk. 236, Anonymous. We don't know who wrote it. 256, Charles Wesley, Methodist co-founder. 169, John of Damascus, an 8th century monk at a monastery near the Dead Sea. 305, an American Negro spiritual, one of many in the hymnal. 306, Fanny Crosby, St. John's Episcopal Methodist Church. 171, George Friedrich Handel, the German composer. 108, John Newton, who helped emancipate the slaves, a Christian in England. 656, Joseph Barnby of St. Andrew's Well Street, London, Anglican. 35, Isaac Watts of the Congregational Church in England. 190, William Batchelder Bradbury, a Baptist. Hymn 12, Beethoven, the great German composer. 674, a Hebrew benediction. 63, an Irish melody. 602, Uriah Smith, an Adventist. And 281, James White, the husband of Ellen White, also an Adventist. From the writings of monks to the desires of American slaves. From the anonymous to famous people. Folk songs and classical music. Boys and girls. white and black, people of all kinds of different cultures throughout the history of Christianity, the New Testament, the Old Testament, in every era. The rich tapestry, 600 of the 700 hymns in the Seventh-day Adventist hymnal are not from a Seventh-day Adventist source. 6 out of every 7 hymns. Now, would this be a better hymnal if all the music were only from the 11th century alone, or from the 16th century, or from the 20th century, or from the last 10 years? Would it be a better hymnal if it were only Irish or English or French or German or Italian or North African or American, or only music written by white Americans from New England in the 19th century? Would it be a better book? Would it be a better book if it were only Baptists or Methodists or Seventh-day Adventists? Would it be a better hymnal if we took Amazing Grace out because it wasn't written by a Seventh-day Adventist? Would it be a better book? Would the Bible be better if we didn't have the testimony of that Roman, after all, a Roman? Would the gospel story be better if we didn't have the Good Samaritan, a Samaritan? Would the genealogy of Jesus be improved if we removed the heathen prostitute Rahab because she was a heathen prostitute? Would the Bible be better if everyone who testified were a Jerusalem Orthodox believer alone? No. But why? I have done something naughty. I have mixed 3 1,000-piece puzzles all together in this mixing bowl. Now, I want you to imagine that we want to build one of these images. It's beautiful, it's wonderful, and the other images are ugly, and we don't want any part of them at all. And so we go about the business of ruling some pieces in and some pieces out. The mixing bowl of the world. You see, this is what Bonhoeffer was getting at, where the cantus firmus is plain and clear, where Jesus is plain and clear. We don't have to run from the world. We are now given permission to do the editorial work of saying that's of Jesus and that isn't. We are free. Now, imagine for me that the piece I now hold in my hand is part of the image we want to create. And this is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Please hear me. It has a particular shape. It has a unique contribution. It has a special gift that it must give the image of Jesus. But it is only one piece. You see, God has never given the totality of His image to just one gender or just one skin color or just one ethnicity or just one historical time period or just one group of people or just one movement or just one church. For He knew that if one group decided that they represented the totality of the image of God, it would be easy to become arrogant and to assume that we have it all. But we've changed the question this afternoon, my friends. We are no longer consumed with our own identity, but instead we are consumed with the beauty, the identity of Jesus Christ. And this frees us. Notice, it in no way compromises our ability and our calling to be unique and peculiar and to be faithful to the contribution God has asked us to make as Seventh-day Adventists, which I believe in a sentence is to remedy the image of God in the world. But it also frees us from the arrogance of assuming that we are everything And it frees us then to explore the world of where God has worked in so many amazing places. No longer focused on me or we, but on He. It changes everything. The lowest part of our year was the death of my wife's mother, my wife Nicole. A young life robbed by a horrible disease at an early age. A few weeks ago, we attended her memorial service, and two things struck me. First, the power of one incredible life bringing together so many people of different places in life from all kinds of circumstances. But second, at the memorial service, Nicole and her sister and her brother got up and gave testimony to their mother. And the first got up and she spoke about beauty and grace and told some wonderful stories. But then another got up and told us even more, a completely different perspective, also with beauty and grace. And then the third testified, yet another angle, grace and beauty and wonder. Would we have been better off to just hear from one child? No. The more children who testify, the better. And the more children who testify about Jesus, the better. And so we are free to listen to the songs and to wrestle with the sermons and to hear the confessions and to see the way that God through Jesus Christ has worked throughout the history of the world, including around the globe today in a variety of places. In 1957, it was not a good year for Adventism. We fought. A historic eruption came about. A lifelong struggle under the question, what does it mean to be a Seventh-day Adventist? Who are we? What if we change the question? I believe that the future of this denomination, which we love, can be bright and healthy and powerful if we will change the question. No longer focusing on ourselves, but instead focusing on Jesus Christ. This is what I believe. How about you?